Poverty and Child Psychology: An Everlasting Impact by Maya Cohen. The effect of poverty on child development is believed to have an everlasting impact on children who grow up in these types of conditions. This presentation will demonstrate the long-lasting effects of poverty on children, the difference in the development of a child who is living in poverty rather than a child who is not, and lastly, the increase of poverty over the last few decades. Poverty has increased immensely over the last few years. As of 2016, 1 in every 7 people in Canada lived in poverty. And today, 1 in 5 children in Canada live in poverty, according to Alison Bailey, who is a news reporter for Live Strong. Here are some basic facts on child poverty in Canada. 3 million children live in conditions of poverty. That's 1 in 5. 1 in 2 status First Nation children lives in poverty. 8% of children in British Columbia under the age of 6 are living in poverty. 1 in 5 Edmontonian children under the age of 18 live in poverty. 40% of Indigenous children in Canada live in poverty, and 60% live in poverty on the reserves. More than 1/3 of our food bank users across Canada were children, and about 1 in 7 of those using shelters in Canada are children. Poverty. This is an important topic because people tend to not take poverty seriously, especially if it is not them in this situation. Every day, walking downtown, we pass at least 30 homeless people, living on the streets, begging for money or food. However, we walk past them as if they are non-existent and continue on with our days. Poverty deeply affects the children who are being brought up in these conditions. A minimal amount of education, food, water, and shelter. The number of children living in poverty continues to increase each year. Poverty is an extremely serious issue that can deeply impact the brain of a child. First, we will discuss the long-lasting effects of poverty on children. According to Dr. Repka, a child and a family health doctor, poverty's most damaging behavioral effects on young children manifest over time. As well as written in an article in the Clinical Psychological Science Journal, authors Gary Evans and Rochelle Castles outline the extensive and devastating impact of childhood poverty. They found that children who experience poverty before the age of 9 are at a higher risk of developing behavioral disorders, great morbidity for chronic disease, and even premature death. Young children growing up in poverty are more likely to have lower cognitive abilities and school achievement and impaired health and development. Most of our growth for brain occurs during our first 6 years of life. There are several different factors that guarantee the child brain to properly develop. For example, high levels of nutrition, appropriate stimulation, and attention and emotional support all help contribute to healthy brain growth, maximizes its productivity, and essentially prepares the mind for future learning capability. However, for children who are born into unideal situations, such as poverty, they do not develop the same, nor nearly as fast as those who grow up in poverty. According to the Bloomberg website, children who are raised in poverty experience chronic stress. The stress which they experience affects certain regions in the brain, which controls their emotions. The same two authors, Gary Evans and Rochelle Castles, follow just about 200 kids aging from 9 years old to 17 years old and notice mainly that children who grow up in poverty are at a higher risk of developing such illnesses like ADHD. The researchers also find that children who grow up in poverty are at a greater risk of developing a behavioral pattern known as learned helplessness, a condition in which children feel as if they have no power to change or control their circumstances. Growing up in poverty is also associated with lower occupational status and a lower wage rate as an adult. We tend to see several differences in the development of a child living in poverty rather than a child who is not only mentally but socially and physically as well. For example, kids who grow up in poverty have very poor education. Children who are raised in poor households fail to have the chance to learn how to properly act in a school environment, according to Professor Eric Jensen. For example, being a part of a school community involves a child to be able to keep up while performing socially and academically, according to Dr. Ferguson, in his paper written for the U.S. National Library of Medicine. He explains that young children attending school must be properly fed, have the strength to make it through the day, good emotional health, and positive attitude towards learning. He explains that there are 6 poverty-related factors that impact child development. They are the incidence of poverty, the depth of poverty, the duration of poverty, the timing of poverty, for example, how old you are, community characteristics, concentration of poverty, crime in neighborhood, and school characteristics, and the impact that poverty has on the child's social network. As we know, kids who grow up in poverty have very poor education because their families are not able to spend all sorts of money on proper education. Therefore, they are usually put into public schools. Lack of food and shelter affects the development of the child brain as well. Kids who struggle with hunger throughout the day deal with an even bigger obstacle at school, which is concentration. Being poorly fed as a child is one of the most important things which each child deserves. Millions of kids each day are starved due to a lack of food in their communities or a lack of money, which is available to be able to purchase these food items. Lastly, growing up is a crucial time for when kids need parental life. For most kids who live in poverty, it is common that they are left unsupervised, due to the fact that their parents are struggling to provide for them. In many cases of poverty, parents are out all day and all night working several different jobs in the attempt to earn enough money, or on the streets begging to have enough to be able to pay for just a dinner for themselves and their child. However, parental life during our first stages as a human is truly vital. This is why children who are left alone without parents because they are out working have several different developing issues. Our parents are the people who teach us everything, like right from wrong. This is why over the past few years, gang violence and crime has gone up in areas of poverty. Also, drug use due to a lack of parental life. As these kids are growing up, they tend to make bad choices because no one was there to tell them no. Children are susceptible developmentally to problems such as biological, behavioral, and environmental in their earliest period of life. Overall, this presentation has highlighted the effect of poverty on child development. It is believed to have an everlasting impact on children who grow up in these types of conditions. As you can see in this presentation, poverty has several different effects on child psychology. As we know, poverty has increased greatly over the last few decades, and it is important to notice this because there is a huge amount of homeless children and children who are living in poverty. It is unfair for these millions of children around the world to be born into these situations and who then have to endure a life full of psychological and physical problems. Thank you.